So for those of you that missed the tutorial or want to hear it again, here is a look at geography. You had this sheet. I have written it on the chalkboard. So the first thing we're going to talk about is actually not the first thing on the sheet, and that is population, because population leads to a lot of the other issues or problems that we're going to talk about. So initially we learned about the types of population pyramid. The first population pyramid is the early expanding pyramid. That's when there's a high birth rate, there's a high death rate, there's lots of disease and famine, not very good medical care. If you were to put this into the demographic transition model, it would probably be in about stage 1. Lots of issues related to this, but a lot of infant mortality, etc. The second population pyramid that we looked at was the expanding population pyramid, and this is one of the most dangerous places to be in the demographic transition model, which is stage 2, kind of stage 3. This is where the birth rate is continually high, but due to advances in medical care, sanitation, sewage, etc., the death rate falls. So you have a population explosion that you want to get under control, so you don't have a gigantic population that can't that will take too many resources, or that your land there's not enough carrying capacity for that land. The next type of pyramid is where Canada sits right now. So Canada, we have a slow and stable kind of growth rate. We have declining birth rates. We have a stable death rate because of medical advances. We're kind of a developed nation, lots of good healthcare, roads, sewage, sanitation. So we're in about stage 4 of the demographic transition model. So our population is gently creeping up. This is one of the best places to be economically. But then if you move to places like Germany or Japan, they have an interesting population pyramid. It's a contracting pyramid whereby you have the elderly and people are living longer, but you have a birth rate that goes below the death rate. So that means that your population is actually shrinking over time, which is not good for the economy. This would be about stage 5 of the demographic transition model. So we talked in class about problems and solutions to population issues. So there's 2 main population issues. One is you have too many people. The other is you don't have enough people. So some of the problems associated with population are there's not enough workers for all of the people that are children or that are the elderly. And this relates to the idea of the dependency ratio. So you want a low dependency ratio. You want more workers paying taxes than you have elderly who require health care, or super young people who require schooling, medical care, etc. So some ways to counteract that is that you can have some baby bonuses if you have too many elderly people, like Japan has. You can have welfare incentives. You can have commercials that talk about how great it is to have large families, etc. Now the biggest population problem that we encounter in the world is really that we have too many people in a country. So there's limited resources in a country and too many people trying to get at them. So this usually leads to famine, war, child labor, some of the terrible things that we've studied in class. There's usually overcrowding, pollution, sewage, fresh water access becomes an issue, lots more diseases with lots of people around, and another issue affecting population is HIV/AIDS. In some countries in Africa, there's really this awful population pyramid with people at the top. The giant workforce era, which are in their reproductive years, are the ones that are shrinking. They're dying of AIDS, and then there's lots of children. So really you have a super high dependency ratio. So what are some of the solutions to population problems? The number one solution is to educate women. In countries where women get educated, there's a lower fertility rate. They have fewer kids. They usually wait longer to have kids, so they get a career established, etc. They have more disposable income, and usually a whole society does better. You can have family life education, so teach people to use birth control, etc., so that they're not spreading both disease or having too many children than they can actually handle. Another way to solve population programs, if you have lots of population, is to build upwards. So build skyscrapers, etc., so that more people can live in one area. For instance, in Singapore, I believe it is, there's 6,000 people living per square kilometer density-wise. It's because they live up instead of spreading out. Another way to solve population problems is immigration. Let people move into your country if you don't have enough people. Then we talked about the concept of living standards. So what is it like to live in a country with lots of poverty, etc.? And we looked at the UN. The UN, when they're deciding if a country is a good place to live or not, has created something called the Human Development Index. What gives a country a high rating is they'll have a high literacy rate, a high GDP, and a high life expectancy. So Canada is one of the top 20 places to live in the world. It used to be one of the top, it used to be number one actually in the Human Development Index, but due to child poverty rates, we've been decreasing in our best place spot to live. Usually it's the Nordic countries. So a place can have a high GDP but a low literacy rate, and it can have high life expectancy and a high GDP but a low literacy rate, like some Islamic states where women aren't educated, and not rank highly on the GDP. Another thing we talked about was the poverty cycle, which basically said in order to stop poverty, we have to somehow intervene in a cycle. For instance, if a poor mother has a baby and is malnourished, her baby will probably be malnourished. So like in a place like Africa, think about that. When they're malnourished, they're going to have lower development. So when they go to school, they're not going to be doing as well in school, which means that they won't have as many opportunities when they graduate, which means they're more likely to be poor, which usually means that they're more likely to have many children, which means that they're more likely to continue that cycle. So how can we stop that cycle? We talked about through foreign aid, tied aid, multilateral aid, bilateral aid. We can go in with NGOs and actually buy women in small villages something like a goat, or give them access to fresh water, etc., so they can earn a living. Teach women a trade or a skill. Educate women, period, and they're actually going to make society do better in general. And that was one of the main themes of our course. When women do better, society does better. Last thing we looked at is comparing Canada to a developing nation. So some of the factors we looked at were, what's the life expectancy in Canada versus a place like Burundi or Lesotho? What's the GDP like? What's the water, the healthcare, nutrition, infant mortality rate, gender equality? And usually Canada was higher in all of these things, doing better, and the developing nation was doing poorly. So if you got an essay question, you would want to mention, what's Canada doing well? How does Canada stack up against a country? We also looked at concepts such as disease, environment, political system, education, and employment. And we saw that Canada, for instance, in its political system was democratic, whereas poorer countries are usually dictatorships. Environmentally, we have lots of fresh water, lots of abundant resources. Countries with poverty have no resources, or it's hard to extract. In terms of diseases, we have great healthcare, vaccination. Countries with poverty do not have these things, and as a result, they're constantly playing catch up. So these are some things to think about. The answers aren't on the board, but that would be something you'd want to kind of think about. Also, look at your key vocabulary sheets for these two units, and you'll see that there's a lot of vocabulary that you would want to know. And for developing nations, you might want to know words, for instance, like highly indebted poor country or HIPC. Okay. Good luck on your exam, and hopefully this helped give you an idea of some of the stuff we've studied in geography. We didn't, however, also go over the environmental geography unit, which was also included on this handout, but was not included in this lecture on the board, as we are still studying it.